morning. We are going to talk about the material under the section called Quadratic Formula and Discriminant. We're going to go over all of the material in this section that we covered in class today. The quadratic formula is another technique that we can use to solve a quadratic equation. It gives us the places where the graph crosses the x-axis. We've talked about graphing already. We've talked about factoring already. Those are two strategies that you can use to find the x-intercepts, or in other words, the places where the graph crosses the x-axis. This is a third technique. The advantage to this technique is that it works for every problem. The disadvantage, sometimes the answers look kind of weird when you're done. But we will take a look at what the formula is and how to use it. At the same time that we're doing this, you need to go through all of the material that's on Canvas. I will look at a little bit of it as we go through here, but you need to take a look at everything. First of all, let's take a look at what the formula says. The formula says that x equals, and x is the solution set that we're looking for. It's the places where the graph crosses the x-axis. So that's why it's x equals. And it looks like this: minus b, which means the same as opposite of b, plus or minus, and that's where the possibility comes that the graph may cross in two places. Square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's the formula. The numbers that we get to put in place of the a, b, and c here come from your regular equation. Remember, your regular equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And just like everything else, in order to use the quadratic formula, the equation has to equal 0. So once you have it equal to 0, then here's your a number, there's your b number, there's your c number, and if there's a negative sign in front of it, you have to use the negative sign. Now, we're going to take a little look at one piece of this formula to start with, and that's this piece that's under the square root sign. This piece right here. We're going to take that piece and we're going to pull it out of the formula and look at it. So when we pull it out, we're looking at just that part. And when you put a number in for a, b, and a c, this is going to simplify down to a single number. This expression right here, this value, is called the discriminant. Have to hyphenate that. It's the discriminant. Now, what's the significance of the discriminant? Well, that value tells you how many times the graph crosses the x-axis. There are 3 different scenarios. If I put numbers in place of the a, the b, and the c, this answer that you get when you finish subtracting could be a negative answer. And we'll use D to be the discriminant. So D could be a negative answer. In other words, you could finish that out and you could end up with like negative 71. Or it could turn out to be just 0. When you took the b squared and then you subtracted the 4ac, the answer could be 0. And the last situation means that the answer could be positive. Those are the only 3 scenarios that we have. Well, if we remember from our graph, let me draw a picture here so you can use it. When we have a graph and we draw a parabola on it, our parabola might look like this. It might open down, but it will cross it in 2 places. Another scenario would be where it touches the graph only once. Looks like that. And the third scenario is it doesn't touch it at all. Looks like that. Well, each one of these three scenarios pairs up with one of these. When the graph crosses it twice, and that's the most common one, when the graph crosses it twice, these have a discriminant greater than 0. So if our discriminant turns out to be a positive number, then we know our graph crosses the x-axis twice. If our discriminant turns out to equal 0, then we know the parabola only touches it once. We don't know where it is that it touches it, but we know it only touches it once. And then logic tells us this must be the third case, and it is. If the discriminant is negative, it does not cross the x-axis at all. That doesn't mean that there aren't any answers. There are still answers, but they are not real numbers. They're not numbers like we're used to using. They are what are called imaginary numbers. And we're not going to talk about the imaginary numbers today, but we will tomorrow. And what they look like and how you get them from this formula. So it's valuable to know how many answers there are, because if you find out that there aren't going to be, it's not going to cross at all, then we don't have any work to do on those. If it turns out to be just 0, it's super easy to find that one point. So there's really no work involved in either one of these once you know what the discriminant is. This is the only kind where there's more work involved. Okay. So let's see if we can use the formula. You are going to want to use your calculator more than likely, unless you're really good at your basic multiplication facts, which you should be. And I'm going to give you a hint as to how to do the problems. If you're following along in your Canvas, if you look at pages 1, 2, and 3, and 4, those are basic information. They ask you to identify the A number, the B number, and the C number from your equation. And then when you get to page 4, there's a video. I encourage you to watch the video. And then when you look at page 5 gives you the quadratic formula, and it tells you how answers might look. So take a look at that. So let's take a look at the first problem that's on the bottom of page 5. And the equation says x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. The first thing is you have to make sure that your equation is equal to 0. Because again, just like factoring, we can't use it if it's not equal to 0. So it's equal to 0, so we're good to go. So the next thing we want to do is make sure that we know what numbers we're going to put in place of the B, the A, and the C. Some students write it down. Other students don't think they need to. You make that choice. But we're going to write it down right now. A is the number right next to the x squared, so it's this number right here. So there's nothing there, so it's automatically a 1. B is the number that's in front of the x, and remember I told you to use the negative sign. And then C is this number that's all by itself. So make sure you have the right numbers and make sure you have the right signs. It doesn't really matter how smart you are. If you pull the wrong numbers and you don't put them in correctly, you're never going to get the right answer. So be careful there. Take your time. Okay, now all we're going to do is we're going to plug these 3 numbers in place of all of the letters up here. And I'm going to encourage you to use parentheses around most of the numbers. This first one is kind of logical, so you probably don't need parentheses, but I'm really going to encourage you to use parentheses there, and I'll tell you why in a second. Okay, this means opposite. So I'm going to take the opposite of the B number. Well, the B number is -7. The opposite of -7 is +7. Then we continue to write plus or minus. Then we have the square root sign. Now this is where we should use parentheses. This is telling you to take the B number. The B number is -12 or -7. So put it in parentheses, -7, close the parenthesis, and then put the square out there. Don't forget the square. Then minus 4. And then here comes another letter. So we're going to use parentheses. That's the A number. So put parentheses. The A number is 1. So put a 1 in there. And then we have a C. It's another letter. So another parenthesis. And the C number is 12. So put 12 in there. All over, and this one you can do in your head. You don't need to write it down. This says to take 2 times the A number. Well, the A number is 1. So 2 times 1 is 2. Now, this is where you can make your work a little shorter. On your calculator, you're going to type in from this red dot to this red dot. Not the square root sign, just the numbers. So you're going to type in parenthesis, -7, close the parenthesis, square, minus 4, open the parenthesis, 1, close the parenthesis, then open another set of parentheses, and 12, and close the parentheses. And then you're going to push enter. And when you do, I'm going to write down the rest of the problem. You will get the number 1. If you put this in correctly, you'll get the number 1. Now, let's stop for just a second. This number 1 is what's called the discriminant. And if you remember back from the notes we just erased, that's a positive number. And positive numbers mean that there are 2 answers to the problem. So we're going to get 2 answers, and they're actually going to come because we have that plus and minus sign. So we know there are going to be 2 answers. So let's find them. 7, we're going to use the plus sign on the first answer. And in this case right here, if you know this square root, then you put it down. If you don't, then you just leave it. Well, we know the square root of 1 is 1, so we put it down. But if that said like the square root of 5, we would just leave it square root of 5. All over 2. And then the other answer is 7 minus the square root of 1, which is 1, all over 2. Now you just simplify it. 7 plus 1 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. This one is 7 minus 1, which is 6, divided by 2 is 3. Those are the 2 answers to the problem. Our graph crosses the x-axis at 4 and at 3. 2 different places, which is what it was supposed to do because that discriminant was 1. Okay, let's try another one. That problem was on the bottom of page 5. If we continue to move on in your material, if we go to page 6, there's another video. So again, I encourage you to watch that. And if you go to page 7, there are 2 practice problems. So let's take a look at the first one. X squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 0. All right, the first thing you do is double check and make sure that the formula or the equation is equal to 0, and it is, so we're okay. So write down what your letters are. A is the number next to the x squared, so it's 1. B is the number next to the x, so it is 6. And C is the number that's by itself, so it's 9. Again, being careful with negative signs. Okay, now we're going to plug them in. This tells you to take the opposite of the B number. Well, the B number is 6, so the opposite is negative 6. Plus or minus. Then we have the square root sign. Now this is where we're going to use parentheses. The first thing it does is tell you to take the B number. So make parentheses. The B number is 6. Close the parenthesis and put the square in. Then keep writing. Minus 4. We have another letter, so we have a set of parentheses, and that letter is A. Well, A is 1. Close the parenthesis, and now you have another letter, which is C, so it has its own parentheses. And the C is the number 9, so put the number 9 in, close the parentheses. And then on the bottom, you can do this in your head. This says to take 2 times the A number. Well, 2 times 1 is 2. Now, I know we just did 2 problems and they were both the same on the bottom. They aren't always going to be that way, so make sure you pay attention to it. All right, now in your calculator, you're going to type in from red dot to red dot. No square roots, just from a red dot to red dot. And when you do, you're going to get the number 0. So if you typed it in right, you should get the number 0. Now, if you remember from our notes, when the discriminant is equal to 0, that means there's only one answer. The graph only touches the x-axis one time. Now let's use some common sense here. And you can put this in your notes because this is always going to be the case. Square root of 0 is 0. So I don't even need that in the problem. Adding and subtracting 0 doesn't change anything. So that's not in the problem. So what you have left is that one answer you were supposed to have. Negative 6 over 2. Well, negative 6 over 2 is negative 3. There's your answer. So if your discriminant turns out to be 0, then the only answer to the problem is this number here, which is the minus b, and this number here, which is the 2a. So if there's only one answer, then that's the answer, always. So once you figure out the discriminant, you can figure out the discriminant before you write anything down. And if you figure out that the discriminant is 0, then just do this little fraction and you're done with the problem. Okay? All right. That was practice number 1 on the bottom of page 7. Let's take a look at practice number 2. Practice number 2 is 3x squared minus 2x plus 4 equals 0. Okay, again, the problem is already equal to 0, so let's go ahead and solve it. Write your numbers down. The a number is the number in front of the x squared. The b number is the number in front of the x. And the c number is the number by itself. Now, let's plug them in. The first thing tells you to take the opposite of the b number. Well, the b number is -2. The opposite is +2. Plus and minus, continue to write, square root. Now underneath is where we're going to use the parentheses. So the first thing we have is the b number. So we take the parenthesis, the b number is -2, and then it says to square it. Then keep writing, -4. Here's another letter, so it needs parentheses. The letter is A. The A is 3. Then you have a C, so it needs parentheses. And the C number is 4. All over. And on the bottom, again, do it in your head. 2 times the A number. Well, the A number is 3. 2 times 3 is 6. Now, you're going to type from red dot to red dot in your calculator. And if you put that correctly, you're going to get, I think it's -44. -2 squared is 4. 4 times 3 is 12, times 4 is 48. So 4 minus 48 is -44. So I did that right. I was trying to do it without the calculator. Okay, I'm sure most of you already figured out this is our third scenario. Here, the D number, the discriminant, is negative. Negative discriminant means it doesn't cross the x-axis at all. So right now, we're going to leave this as our solution. Tomorrow, I'll tell you how to take care of that negative. And if you were looking in the notes, you'll notice in Canvas that there are some answers that have a little letter I in them. That's where those come from, a problem like this. And I will show you tomorrow how to do that. Okay. All right, hopefully by now you know how to use the quadratic formula. The easiest mistake to make is with the positive and negative signs. And the reason for the parentheses, I forgot I was going to mention that to you. Let's say underneath the square root sign you had this. Say something like that. I encourage kids to put the parentheses in for this reason. If you don't have the parentheses in there, there are a lot of students that will say, well, -7 squared is -49. What they'll do is they'll just punch in -7 and they'll push the square button and it will come up -49. And the reason for that is the calculator does the order of operations. And if you remember from PEMDAS, please excuse, it does the exponent first. So what it'll do is it'll take the 7 and it'll square it and get 49. Then it will multiply it by -1 because there's a negative sign out in front. But it's not that. We know that a negative times a negative is a positive. So if you put the parentheses in, you never make that mistake. That's why I encourage you to use the parentheses under the square root sign. You don't have to if you don't want to. You just need to make sure you don't make that mistake. So that's how to use the discriminant to tell you how many answers there are. That also tells you how to use the formula. There are 2 worksheets on Canvas now that are on quadratic formula and discriminant. One is just called a worksheet and the other is worksheet number 2. Those are both published. You should be able to take a look at those and start working on them. As I put in the email, do not submit the worksheet until you have all of your questions answered. Tomorrow, we will take a look at a couple of questions from the quiz, and we'll take a look at those negative discriminants. And then we're going to move on to the last section that we're going to do, which is on transformations. And really, we've done those before. We just haven't called them transformations. So we will do that, and then we will start reviewing for the exam. Again, the exam's on Tuesday, so don't forget. If you haven't signed up for parent conferences, do that so you can get extra credit. Go on the dashboard and you can sign up for the conferences there. So make sure you join the Zoom or message me if you have any questions. Thank you.